The two biggest drone strikes of the war so far against Ukraine, Putin being called crazy by Trump, and finally the Taurus cruise missile from Germany. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. An even bigger, the two biggest airstrikes against Ukraine so far have happened with drones. The first one has happened on the night to the 24th with 9 Iskander, to the 25th with 9 Iskander-M and KN-23, the ballistic missiles, 55 KH-101 and caliber, 1 KH-22, as well as 4 KH-59 or 69. In addition to that, 295 drones were used. The Ukrainians managed to down 266 drones as well as 47 cruise missiles out of 60. In the this was one attack. The next one followed the next day with 355 drones and 9 KH-101. The Ukrainians managed to down 288 drones as well as all 9 cruise missiles. Those were the two biggest strikes that Ukraine has faced so far in the air war with drones. In the first one, a huge number of cruise missiles was also used. As we can see here, the number is steadily increasing, and after some lull, it has now gone down up quite significantly. Trump, in reaction to those strikes, called Putin crazy. He said he can't understand why Putin would do that, why he would strike cities. And when he then blamed Putin for this and wrote an angry message on Truth Social, he couldn't leave out, though, to blame Zelensky for the same thing as well, for prolonging the war. Basically, he was not able to write a text that is just blaming Putin. He had to do but Ukraine also. The Kremlin, in reaction, responded, calling it an emotional overload that was responsible for this in a sensitive moment, basically saying that Trump was hysteric when he wrote that. Ukraine, on their side, struck the Tula KBP design bureau that is responsible for parts of the Pantsir system, and in Yelabuga, the factory was struck that produces Shahid missiles. To which degree the damage was done in each case and whether that is going to impede construction is a different story that unfortunately I cannot answer. We'll switch to the developments along the front line, and here we start in Sumy. The Russians have advanced in the town of Bilovody. We have a geolocation here of them having advanced a little further south, and the Russians advanced in Kursk itself, here in the outskirts of Gornal, one of the cities they have probably liberated or at least pushed the Ukrainians mostly out recently. And here the Russians have recently been spotted at this point here. So while we see the Russians operating in the contested areas again, I cannot confirm a full change in territorial control in the Sumy-Kursk region over the past few days. We switch to the Kharkiv region, and here we have the Russians reaching other areas of the aggregate plant that we have here. This is inside of the map, indicating that it is increasingly a contested area after the Russians have recently been spotted down here, and they have advanced in the east and taken additional control. We have the Ukrainian mill blogger Petrenko confirming that they managed to extend their foothold. He's expecting that they want to use this to cross the Vovcha and then flank Vovchansk from the east. We'll switch to, before we switch, we have further things. We have, again, Ukrainian soldiers saying that the Russian concentration on the other side of the border is increasing. Details so far are not known, but it would indicate renewed vigor of the Russian offensive activity there. We switch to the Eastern Front, and here we have only two changes. The Russians have advanced in this area here. They have advanced in Lipove. We have a geolocation of this, first of all, down here, where they've gotten a little bit west of Nove, and they managed to reach Ritkodup, a little to the northwest of it. So the Russians have reached more or less this point and this point here on the map. That was it north of the Seversky Donetsk. We moved to the area south of it, and here the Russians have reached again, or have at least operated again in Verkhno-Kamyanske, here directly to the northwest of it. This here, again, the whole area must be a contested area now, a contested gray zone, as we had the Russians operating inside of Verkhno-Kamyanske a couple of days ago. According to what I can observe on the map, the region roughly like this here is probably a gray zone by now. Verkhno-Kamyanske is definitely no longer under solid control of the Ukrainians, and it seems extremely unlikely that Ryhorivka is under Ukrainian control either. This area is to a certain degree a contested area, a gray zone. To which degree the Russians managed to actually gain a foothold further west, I have no clue. That I can't confirm, but the Russians are now more or less consistently operating inside the area east of that line. Further south in Chasiv Yar, we have the Russians also operating. We have a geolocation here on the eastern side of Chasiv Yar down here, but it is a Russian motorcycle attack that is being defeated. So while it indicates the Russians operating in this area, I do not see that this led to some additional territory under their control. Further south, the Russians have now pushed in the pocket south of Soria and Romanivka, of those two towns. The deep state map itself already showed this here being pushed in, but very likely the Ukrainians down here have either withdrawn or are in the process of being pushed out there, as we have visual evidence of the Russians having taken both Romanivka. We have positions inside and north of it, and we have the Russians inside of the town of Soria as well. So the Russians control Soria, they control Romanivka, and at best the Ukrainians, if there are still some south of it, they would have to withdraw over the open area between those 2 points. So it seems obvious that this area is going to be fully under Russian control, including the towns of Rnativka and Stara Mykolaivka within the next few hours, or at most 1 or 2 days. That's it from this area. We switch to the Pokrovsk region, and here we have the Russians advancing southeast of Poltavka. This is already on the other side of the T0504, and we have them in this area in Popiv Yar, where they've also advanced. So on the map, this is in Popiv Yar. The Russians have already reached this point here now. So the southern part of Popiv Yar this year has to be considered a contested area. This is definitely no longer solidly under Ukrainian control. And to the east of it, the Russians have also advanced in this area here. This again does not lead to Russian control, but indicates that the Ukrainians likely have been pushed out of there. That was it in territorial changes or in movements over the border. We have one more interesting thing directly north of Melitopol in the town of Novobodanivka. The Ukrainians managed to strike a fuel train with drones here in this area. This is a full 50 kilometers away from the front line, where the Ukrainians, we can see that here, where the Ukrainians show that with obviously very sophisticated drones, as you can see how clear the images are here due to the distance. And you can see, despite the distance, you can see thermal vision, and you can see that the fire has already started. The Ukrainians have struck a fuel train here. This should damage the railway lines, but it is one of the rare attacks of the Ukrainians that so far have barely ever done that. And thus the Russian supply, while it's being stopped right now, is nowhere close to collapsing in this unless the Ukrainians keep up those attacks. But this is interesting too from both sides. We've seen relatively few attacks on the railworks system itself in the past 3 years of the war, despite the railroad system being used fairly close to the front line from either side. In the overall situation, we have Syrskyi, the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, saying that the Russians have lost this year alone 177,000 soldiers in total. the casualties. The DIA is the Defense Intelligence Agency is saying that the Russians have lost 170,000 KIA in total, though. So far, the Russians gain 14.3 square kilometers per day in 2025. This would mean it would take an additional 3.9 years to conquer the rest of the annexed territories. So the rest of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk, this more or less would take a full 3.9 additional years. If we take the losses, as the Russians have lost 1,500 men daily in 2024, if we take those losses for the next 3.5 years, for the Russians to conquer that, obviously that's far too simple. In reality, the numbers will change all the time. But should the Russians advance with a consistent speed of this as they've achieved so far this year, should they suffer the same losses, then it would not only take them 3.9 years, but they would also lose over 2.1 million men in the process of the next 3.9 years. The DIA is also saying that for Putin, this war is being considered an existential conflict, which will define Russia's role in the world, Putin's Putin's grip on power, as well as how the future generations will see him and his regency. So this is one of the reasons why Putin, while it was naive from Trump to expect that without exerting massive pressure against Putin, he will achieve anything short of a Ukrainian capitulation. The DIA is also saying, though, that the usage of nuclear weapons remains highly unlikely, except if there is an existential threat to Russia itself. So no nuclear threat that has to be considered serious right now. We have in troop generation something from the neighboring country, from Belarusia. Here, Belarusia said that for SAPAT 2025, the exercise with Russia, they are receiving Sukhoi 30 SM2, Mi-35 combat helicopters, BTR-82As. Those are wheeled APCs that can basically be used as an IFV because of the armament, as well as electronic warfare and drones. So the Belarusians receive modern weaponry, new modern weaponry from the Russians in front of that exercise. 8,000 Belarusian soldiers will train with this to be ready for the exercise that is expected in the middle of September. Now there are considerations and fears being said that the SAPAT 2025 could be a disguised preparation for an assault against NATO in the west or against Ukraine from the north. In both cases, it seems highly unlikely as of now. We should have months in preparation and months in times of warning if there is a real threat, as the Russians will have to set up the logistics for that, from railway heads that are moved forward to supply depots to field hospitals. All of this has to be set up in a much bigger scale than for an exercise, and thus will give ample warning unless the Russians want to attack completely unprepared, without supplies, without the necessary logistics, which would obviously not end too well for them. So while we see the Belarusians prepare, and while that might prepare them better in case they were planning to attack the West together with Russia, so far there does not seem to be any reason to be alarmed about this thing here, about the developments. Then we have news from international support. The last promised F-16 from the Netherlands have been delivered towards Ukraine. The Ukrainians were promised in total 24, so we know that the 24 Dutch F-16s have now been given to the Ukrainians. The German Chancellor Merz has said that the limitations on range towards Western weaponry that is employed by the Ukrainians have now been lifted by all participants. The interesting part is, though, why he says that and what does it mean. Obviously, there weren't that many restrictions anymore for quite some time. The question was more what the Ukrainians are allowed to attack and how many of those they are even having. So this whole posturing here is somewhat unclear, unless, of course, this is coming in combination with a delivery of German Taurus. This is at least believed by a lot of analysts, including the Russian two majors, who say show here the ranges that the Ukrainians could achieve with those weapons, including Moscow, by the way. But while they say that, of course, we shouldn't take it lightly, but it's not going to decide the war, and this is, in fact, obviously the truth, the number that can be expected by Germany is somewhere between 100 and 150. At best, 200 Taurus. This is not a war-deciding weapon in numbers like this. So far, officially, the decision hasn't been made, but the conversations Merz had with his colleagues in Great Britain and in France indicate that a delivery of Taurus is somewhat likely. But as said, officially, there is nothing yet, nothing solid yet. But the government also said they are no longer going to publicly say when they deliver something in detail. So the Russians might be surprised in a couple of months by facing the Taurus inside of Russia. But that was it from me for today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.